Today's challenge is going to be allowing cross-account access to an API Gateway REST function from one account to another user. It's important to be able to allow this access for any sort of accesses that you may require in the future. So the question for today, we'll go ahead and dive right into it.
Today we'll be covering accessing an API gateway from one account by users from a second account. This will be sometimes useful when you need to make sure that you're cross-authorized by a second account, but you still need to be able to access that API gateway. So let's take a look at the AWS question for today. You have a company that's using API Gateway for a REST API on an AWS account. The developer wants to allow only IAM users from another AWS account to access these APIs. Which combination of steps should the developer take to meet these requirements? And we'll be selecting two from the options available. So our first option is that we create an IAM permission policy. We attach that policy to each IAM user. We set the method authorization type for the APIs to AWS IAM, and you use signature version 4 to sign the API requests. The second option is that we create an Amazon Cognito user pool. We add each IAM user to the user pool. And you set the method authorization type for the APIs to Cognito user pools. And we authenticate by using IAM credentials in the Amazon Cognito and add the ID token to the request headers. Third option is that we create an Amazon Cognito identity pool and add each IAM user to the identity pool. We then set the method authorization type for the APIs to Cognito user pools. And finally, we authenticate by using the IAM credentials in Amazon Cognito. And then you have to make sure that you add the access token to the request headers. Fourth option is to create a resource policy for the APIs to allow access for each IAM user only. And finally, create an Amazon Cognito authorizer for the APIs to allow access to each IAM user only, and set the method authorization type for APIs to Cognito user pools. So remember, you need to choose two options here to create a combination that would work for the request that we're looking for. So the correct answer is going to be using options A and D together. Now let's take a look at the other options available and why we didn't choose them. So for B, the option would allow the users from the AWS account to access the APIs, but would not require them to authenticate. And obviously this is not a secure option, we can't go with this one. And then C, this option would create the Cognito identity pool, which is a collection of users that is used to authenticate with Amazon Cognito. And then the developer would then use these to create a user pool for each IAM user in the AWS account and add them to that user pool. This is an option and it would work, but however, it's more complex. We want to go with the simpler option, obviously, whenever we have the choice. Let's look a little bit more on how we would implement the solution that we were looking at using A and D. So you create a resource policy by granting API access in one AWS account to users in the different AWS account using signature 4 protocols. So the ways that you would do this is first you would create the IAM permission policy in the account that hosts the API gateway. In the second one, you would attach each policy to the IAM user that's going to be accessed the API gateway. Then you need to make sure the method authorization type for APIs is AWS IAM, as you can see in the image here. This will tell API Gateway to authenticate the request using IAM credentials. And then you need to make sure finally that you are using signature 4 for your authorization. So that's everything we're going to cover today. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments and we'll be happy to follow up.